Everybody, I'm Adam Lehrhaupt, and welcome back to Picture This, the podcast where we explore innovative ways to use picture books in the classroom, in the library, and beyond. I want you to take a second and imagine a creator who seamlessly blends history, science, and art to craft engaging stories for young readers. Someone who makes really good music noises behind my voiceover. Someone whose journey took him from animating for Sesame Street to authoring award-winning children's books that educators and students cherish. This individual has a knack for demystifying complex subjects, making them accessible and entertaining. His works, such as Now and Ben, Neo Leo, and the awesome Timeless Thomas, are staples in educational settings, sparking curiosity and discussion. My next guest has a unique perspective on the creative process that we're going to explore today, offering valuable insights into how his stories come to life from initial conception to final illustration. Join me in welcoming my good friend, Gene Barretta.
Did you mention the kids are reading these books? I have to stop using all this profanity in the books.
Well, I actually said children, which is even, I think children are younger than kids, but I think kids go all the way up to,
I'm in trouble
to
then.
teenagers. So
Yeah, I've got to start editing.
It's okay. This podcast is for educators, librarians, parents. So hopefully they're used to a little what do they call it? Blue comedy.
I'm not talking about now. I mean what I've been putting in the books.
It's what's between the words, right?
Right.
Jason? It's what's the subtext.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Very, I'm thrilled to have you because you do have a very unique perspective on the creative process. And we did have a couple of discussions leading up to this. So let's start.
Can I just mention one thing before we start?
Absolutely.
I want everybody to know that Adam and I grew up in the same neighborhood in Yardley, Pennsylvania, and we just discovered that we both grew up going to the same drive-in theater, which is pretty amazing because I've been going to a drive-in theater for the last 5 years on a regular basis during the summer, and it's a hot topic for me.
It is. I love that that you go to a theater that still uses film, like reels.
The only one, the Mahoning Drive-In, the only one that still uses 35 millimeter, and it's at Retro Drive-In. It's an amazing place.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to know more about that, Gene is always posting on his social media about his trips to the drive-in and some of the really cool events that they do there and the movies. I mean, really, you just got done with doing a couple of Muppet movies.
Yeah, that's what we become. My son and I go, and we've become really close with the people who run the place. And every year now, because of my Muppet connection, I do a Muppet weekend or event. This is the third year we've done it. There's all sorts of, every weekend is a new theme and people dress up and they have people from the movies come and they decorate. Look it up, Mahoning Drive-In. It's right above Allentown, about 20 miles above Allentown.
I'll put a link for people so that they can stop by and check it out. It really is worth a trip if you get a chance. And let's go back to that connection, right? So your background includes animating for children's television and designing characters. How have those experiences influenced your approach to creating picture books?
Well, it's all, all the arts feed off of each other. And I wanted to be a film director originally. So I not only did animation and character design, but I worked in live action film and TV production for a while. And that was my training. And I wrote a little bit in scripts and things. So I was able to take all of that into the picture books I make. And these picture books are really like mini movies to me. I still get to direct and write and be a scenic designer and character designer. But I've also learned how to pace a story, how to edit information, how to develop characters, how to build up to a climactic moment, the compositions, the layouts, all of that for me came more from my film passion than books, really, than picture books.
So when you present your books to an audience, do you incorporate some of that cinema, talk about some of your books in a cinematic way, or talk about maybe a animation thing that you put together in line with that? Or is it more here's kind of something I did, but now we're just going to talk about this story and the context.
Well, yeah, I stick to talking in picture book language because for one, my presentations, they don't encompass everything I do. Well, I'll talk about that stuff if I'm doing a broader talk to an older audience and going through my career. But with my elementary school assemblies, I'll break down what it takes to put an illustration together. No matter what your style is, we all go through the same 3 or 4 steps to get an illustration completed. And then I move into talking about how I decided to make the next step into writing. And we go through this really fun exercise that teaches them perseverance, really, because I show them all the different versions of Now and Ben that it took to get my first book signed as an author. And they're voting, who thinks the editor read this and said, "Thank you for doing all this extra work. I appreciate it. Let's make this version." And it's either yes or no, and they learn a good lesson there. But the majority of my school assemblies involve my friend Bill Ochester, who's also one of Philadelphia's Ben Franklin interpreters. Maybe biased, but I think he's the best. But he wears all period clothing, made the way it was made, all this stuff. And we move into reading Now and Then, and as I'm reading, he's a surprise, and he comes out and he reads the book through with me, and I take questions throughout, and so all of that fills up an assembly.
So it does become, it is cinematic in the effect that you bring out a real live character,
right?
Which is a little bigger than a book. Like, I think when students think about a book, they think about either text on a page or text and pictures on a page, or maybe just the pictures on the page, but really bringing that to life and creating something that's a little bit different, like acting out scenes from the book, or writing a story and acting out that story, getting a couple of their friends together and acting out that little scene.
He'll embellish as we go. And so when we're talking about the kite experiment, he just puts down the book and he kind of presents the moment for them and talks about, and I always love watching the kids at that point, because when he says he touches his finger to the key and a spark jumps out, and he gets really emotional, and you see all the kids just jump off the floor a little bit. But yeah, there's a little performance in there along the way.
I love that. I love that you bring that in. And we were talking before we started recording about some of the movie tie-ins that I do with my school visits, where I will take a character that's known to the audience from a more recent film and talk about the problem and solution, or the setting and how to use a setting, right? So how do you make the setting because your whole thing could take place in a room. For instance, so Bill and Ted are on Broadway doing Waiting for Godot by Sam Beckett. And I can't wait to go see it. Like, it takes place in an empty space, but as the play goes along, how they use that space changes. So the setting is basically nothing. I mean, like Sam Beckett is all about, being a nothingness, but how the characters relate to that space defines the setting, and just getting students to understand how important the setting can be, right? So for Ben, right, his world, that setting really informs your story, and having that character at your presentation really takes it to another level to bring that setting right in for the kids.
And especially for the themes of my inventor books, because I've set up the format of Now and Then. So half of the time they're looking at images that take place back when the inventions were originally created or just conceived, and the other half is their modern day world. So it's a bit of time traveling to go along with it.
Yeah, and it also tackles some pretty difficult historical or scientific topics, so like some of what Ben Franklin did and what Leonardo did are complex things for adults to understand. How do you kind of take that complex information and think about it in terms of an engaging narrative for your young readers?
Well, I can get, having the illustrations helps a lot because you can break it down and simplify it. You can simplify the text, and
For those that don't know,
yeah.
Gene does both author, illustrator. So
Okay, yeah.
in case anybody isn't aware, multiple hats.
Yeah, which is cool too. Because at first I was just illustrating for authors, and then doing both, and now I've been writing for other illustrators, which is a whole other thing we can talk about. But it's been great to kind of know what it's like on the opposite side of the
Don't look behind the, right? We're not allowed to talk to illustrators.
Right, which is ridiculous because I've become good friends with one of the illustrators. But anyway, so
complex information. What's kind of your process for making that, presenting it in a way that a young reader can really enjoy it and take something away?
Well, I just always have to think of what the human element is and just be conscious of why they would even care in the first place. Because when I'm talking about writing Now and Then, for example, I mentioned how I was inspired to do it because I was living in the city of Philadelphia at the time, and I would walk down the street and somebody would say to me, "Hey, do you see that over there? Ben Franklin invented that, or he helped discover this." And it made living in that neighborhood so much more exciting to understand the origins of everything, not everything, but a lot of the things that I use every day or see every day. And so I try to make sure I'm connecting it, or the inventions I've chosen to talk about have a connection to these kids. They're familiar with the modern version of it and even use these things on a regular basis. I'm sticking to the broad ideas of these inventions. I'm not getting too complicated into the science of it all. But for example, in Timeless Thomas, when I talk about the tinfoil phonograph, the illustrations allowed me to add a little extra text with the diagrams and things, because if I'm just reading aloud without the images, you'll still understand the concept of it. But if the kids are really fascinated and want to know more, there's more information there in the images. Same with Neo Leo. Every time you see the things back in his day when he's creating, it's on a mock-up of what his notes used to look like, and it also gives me a chance to let them know how he wrote everything backwards, 20,000 pages of notes backwards, and so I actually have backwards notes that they can hold up to a mirror and get more information on the designs, and that's all happening in the illustrations, independent of how it's explained in a broader way in the text.
I love that part of the story, the visual aspect of it. Every time I see it on that kind of, it almost looks like parchment, kind of, sort of. It makes me think of, do you know the movie Hudson Hawk?
Sure, yeah.
So, by the way, one of my favorite horrible movies of all time. When I showed it to my wife, I was like, if you don't laugh at this movie, I don't think we can get married, kind of movie. But it makes me think about that, Leonardo's journal from that, where it has that same texture. I mean, it definitely doesn't look authentic,
sure,
but it does, but appear that way, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do you take this illustration and give the appearance of something that's hundreds of years old for an audience who's going to believe that it's that old, very willingly.
Yeah. Well, part of it is just in the way, nobody's going to be convinced, that they're seeing real parchment or anything, but I played with the palette. But anyway, I played with the palette where, the modern day images are full palette and the earlier periods are more monochromatic. So I at least do that. What I was able to do too with the Neo Leo, I didn't want to just repeat the exact format for the Franklin, Edison, and Leonardo. I added something each time. Like Leonardo, you get the designs, of course, but in the bottom corner of each page, I put a little vignette to show maybe the initial moment he was inspired. Like when we're talking about the aircrafts he designed, you've got an image of him watching the birds flying as he's studying how their wings moved, things like that.
So that's a really good opportunity to connect your stories to a classroom activity, right?
Yeah.
Where it's look around you, watch a ball roll, watch a bird fly, watch how an animal eats, and think about that action and create something that does that same thing. And what would you use it for?
Right.
Which would be a really fun little STEM activity for the classroom. And you can tie it into the story, and you can show the little vignettes and talk to the vignettes and really build something cool with that.
I like this because I like your ideas here, because I'm not a formal educator, a teacher, or a librarian, so I'm not really too aware of those kind of activities that happen once the book is in their lap.
Well, it's all clarity. I'm not either, but I do have a passion for taking things that I love and trying to find more ways to use them. And picture books, and the reason you're on here, your picture books specifically, are something that I love. Like, I really think that there are so many more ways that we can be integrating these tools into the school environment and creating lessons around them that are, first of all, easy to do, but also really support the curriculum and, and get educators thinking about tools differently, right? So I'm not an educator, but I'm talking to educators for this podcast. I'm talking to creators for this podcast, and I'm trying to find ways to connect the really cool thinking styles, like how you envision things and how you put things together, and the really cool thinking styles about how an educator puts a lesson plan together. Because they are two different ways of putting my one hand off screen here, putting things together. They're two different ways, but the same goal. Right? The same goal is to create something that's going to help the person that's using it, right? Or benefit them somehow, give them enjoyment, give them knowledge. We're trying to move things forward. So I think there's so many ways to connect these things.
Yeah, for sure. Back matter helps a lot too,
It definitely does, especially when you're doing, some nonfiction kinds of things, or even a narrative, nonfiction story where you're saying, all right, here's something that is true, but I created a fantasy world around it. And then your back matter is, here's the true story of how that works. So like Sloth Went, which is basically it's a potty training story, but it's the true story of how dangerous it is for a sloth to go to the bathroom. And that's 50% of all sloths die going to the bathroom. Yeah.
I believe this.
Oh yeah. So I found out in watching some programs that the most dangerous thing for a sloth to do is go to the bathroom, because they don't use their tree. Right. So they have to come down from the tree, and then they go and they have a whole process. They dig a hole, they do a dance. It's really, really cool.
I just made a note because I have.
Yeah, definitely. But similar to how you do your research, right? Yeah. So, when starting a new project, you have to do research. Right. And then from there, you start with your creative storytelling. That's what I did. I did this research and I was like, okay, so this is a natural potty training story. So I wrote a potty training story about the, baby sloth's first trip down the tree by himself, and how scared he was and worried he was, and how he had support from all the other little bugs on the tree, and mama sloth and everything, and
what he was going to take to read while he was going.
Exactly. And my illustrator for that his name is Benson Shum, and Benson is a Disney animator.
Oh wow.
So he does a lot of similar thinking around his illustrations to how you do it, and and keyframes and those kind of things, and he created just a wonderful little like pooping sequence for Sloth, where you don't actually see him pooping, but you see him like from here up in his face as he does what he's doing, and then he does his happy dance and goes back up the tree, and they have a big party for him. But so I told that story to ask you how you balance all of your research with that creative storytelling, so that you have the accuracy without compromising your reader's engagement in your story.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, the back matter, of course, like is an important part, because you always want to say so much more than you have, than you can with the space you have. And so, and plus, you don't want it to clutter the narrative that you're building. It's because it'll be just pretty evident that you're just trying to sneak something in because you thought it was interesting, but it's like, well, where did that come from? We're talking about, this whole other issue. There's there's a way to personalize it, like a lot of this. Like, for example, again with the Edison book, I'm saying to them, do you love playing your favorite music whenever you want? Well, guess what? Before Edison invented the tinfoil phonograph, there was no way to record or play any kind of sound, let alone music. And so I'm immediately putting it in their world or their own experience for them. And like I mentioned, you can actually see it all spelled out in the visuals there. I always, for one, make sure that I find great fact checkers for my nonfiction books. They're either people that are, either professors that specialize in these people. There's the person I had for the Edison book. He actually is in charge of the Edison papers, which are all of Edison's notes and things. So I'm always making sure everything's accurate first. And then for the more formal biographies, though, I think of the key moments in the characters' lives or careers, and find the details or the emotions that an elementary aged kid would recognize and experience in their own lives. Like in my latest one, starring Steven Spielberg, I'm dealing with his early years, and he's making his 8mm movies and things, but he's also dealing with bullying, lots of bullying because of his religion, and his parents are getting a divorce, and there's all these dramatic things happening in his life as he's trying to just make his home movies. Bullying and divorce is something that anyone is going to connect with.
We talked about keyframes a little bit, finding the key moments, the keyframes in that life,
right?
And then creating the story around that. Like sometimes we know a lot of information, like for Spielberg, we happen to know a lot about his early life, but for somebody like Ben or Leo, we don't have as much information there. So writing that story becomes kind of it becomes a creative process. So I like the idea of, we always have students in all these grades are doing here, write a factual paper, like do some research in the library and write a paper about, something that really happened or a real person. Well, what if the next part of that lesson is that just becomes the back matter? And now you can write a creative story with that as the basis, and that becomes an activity. So now we're building off something that, a lot of educators are already doing, but now we're allowing the students to do that freewheeling, thing where they can be creative with it and say, all right, pick one thing from that research that you did, and now write your version of how that happened with those facts as the basis.
Yeah. Well, like my George Washington Carver book, I picked his secret garden when he was a kid to talk about because everything started there for him. So you have all these moments in there. It's called The Secret Garden of George Washington Carver. And you've got all these moments in there where he's just with his garden and he's fantasizing and he's talking to them and he's having a relationship with these plants and things. And it's what kids do every day. So they're like, wow, he does this too? I do this with my toy soldiers and dolls and things, but he's having the same relationship with, a violet. Things like that.
Yeah.
So much of at least half the book deals with that garden, and you are then able to see where it took him, and we get into the important moments. We even start with the important moments, like with the Carver book and the Muhammad Ali book. I start the book with them as adults so that you immediately know why we're even talking about this person to begin with. And then we jump back in time and follow it right back up to the present day or the more current time.
So speaking about current times, are there any new things that you're working on, things you're experimenting with, different formats? What can educators look forward to from you, Gene?
Well, I just learned the true meaning of leaving your comfort zone with this latest book. And it's Comes out October 7th. I found that out recently. It's called The Apprenticeship of Andrew Wyeth. And it's all about Andrew Wyeth, who was one of the great American painters of the 20th century. And I'm fanatical about the Wyeth family, N.C. Wyeth and Jamie and Andrew and Henriette. And I happen to live not too far from where they lived in Pennsylvania, because they split their time between Maine and Pennsylvania. And so I got to know all the people at the museum really well and became friends with people he knew. It's the first book where I actually know the people who were closest to the subject I'm writing about. And so I'm getting lots of great inside information. And I've become friends with his granddaughter, Victoria. And so one day we're on the phone, and I'm telling her about something I discovered that was Wyeth related. And she said, "Let me ask you a question. Do you think you're obsessed? Do you think you're obsessed?" I said, "Yeah, I guess I am." And she said, "Yeah, it was sometimes, if I didn't like you so much, I'd think it was kind of weird."
You're getting creepy with your Wyeth stalking.
Right, exactly. So after we hung up, I thought about that, and then I texted her and I said, that was a really eye-opening conversation, because this is the first time I get to experience this through your perspective, through the perspective of the people that were there and knew him. And it really does change how you approach your material and what you want to talk about and what you should and what you shouldn't. And, based on all the inside stuff you hear. But it was really eye-opening to understand that we mythologize a lot of these people, but to their relatives, it's just like, oh, my uncle, who I've seen in his pajamas on Christmas morning.
And how cool would it be to write, again, thinking classroom activities, if you get a book and you're talking about, Thomas Edison, what's Thomas Edison's, friend?
Yeah.
Friend's perspective. Write a story, do your research on Thomas Edison, and then the project is pick a family member or a friend, and a lot of authors I know do this, a pet. Like there's so many stories about a famous historical figure from the viewpoint of their pet, or
Right.
a bird that sits outside their farm window, or like those kinds of stories.
Yeah.
And we can bring that into the classroom too as a fun activity and relate.
Yeah. Could you be friends with that person? Would you like to be friends with that?
Yeah. What would the story be if you write it from the viewpoint of you're their friend and doing something that you love, right? So maybe your story is playing basketball with your favorite,
with Benjamin Franklin.
with your favorite, creator, Ben Franklin, or maybe you got a little Michelangelo, and you're instead of painting and sculpting with Michelangelo, you're out fishing.
Right.
What do you and Mike talk about out on the lake when you're fishing? Because that's your passion. That could be a real fun activity to do in the classroom.
Yeah. The one other thing, though, that was the real coming out of my comfort zone moment, though, was, if you know my books, my illustration style is lighthearted, semi-cartoonish, humorous. But the reason I've been writing for other illustrators lately is because I've been writing stories where the tone is a little different, and my style just wouldn't be appropriate for it. And that's why the Carver book and the Ali book and the Spielberg book have different illustrators. But what I've been doing during that period is experimenting with my own style. And I haven't left my old style, but I also now have a much more mature style, which is getting lots of really good reaction. And I did the Wyeth book in this more mature style that complements the work of Andrew Wyeth.
I can't wait to see that. And this episode will drop just a little bit before it comes out, so we won't have too long to wait before we get to all see that book for ourselves. I think there's a bunch of Wyeth stuff that's around the Philadelphia Art Museum, and they've had some things there. When I was going to Tyler, we got to go into the art museum for free all the time. We used to just spend hours and hours there walking around. So yeah, I've seen a couple of them. His most famous one is it's like a girl in a field.
Field.
Yeah, that's
That's
See,
at the
I
Museum of
remember
Modern
my
Art.
art history just a little bit.
Well,
A
now
little bit.
also too, what I could say about this book is that the main theme of the book is how an artist finds their voice. So I
Mm.
made it for young kids so they could see what he was doing as a child and why he was so excited about making art, and putting him in a situation where they can see what he's doing and realistically say, I can do that too. I mean, even throughout his whole life, he basically painted in his backyard, just the neighborhood, which they can do. They can find a lifetime of inspiration in their backyard, really.
If you're at home, write a poem or draw a picture or make a little a story, video story of something in your environment, right? In your setting, and be creative in your setting.
There's some samples. We have real work in the book, so there's samples of talking about him and some of the amazing things he did.
This is the part where we get into Adam's book bag, and we're going to do this a little differently today because I usually kind of force people into picking picture books, but I want to open this up. We're going to talk about something that is creative inspiration for you when you're talking to people about your work or your process. So what's in your book bag today?
Well, I'm glad you opened it up because you could probably expect I would find that in a movie. Probably before I would think about it in a book, just because of my background. And I think about Hitchcock's Rear Window a lot, actually, because the people I find most fascinating, the people I like to write about, are the ones that just have a passion and a sharp focus on what they want to do. And that's what motivates them and guides them to the end point. So they're discovering things and solving things and learning things with such a deep focus. And I think it's because that's who I was as a young kid. I wanted to do two things: make little Super 8 films and draw comics. And that's all I needed. But so like in Rear Window, for example, we have our main character, Jimmy Stewart, who's broken his leg, and he thinks there's been a murder across the courtyard.
Yeah.
And he's so fascinated with it. I mean, he's more fascinated than he is getting Grace Kelly to kiss him and flirt with him. He can only do so much to achieve his goal, but nothing's going to get in his way. So he has to get creative. And his passion is contagious to not only us, the viewer, but then to Grace Kelly, who helps him out. And it all builds to a climactic moment.
So do you almost feel a little bit like Jeff in that Jimmy, what's the character's name? The character's name is Jeff, I think. I think it's Jeff. I could be making that up. I make up everything. I don't write nonfiction, Gene. I write fiction. Pretty much solely write fiction.
Right.
Do you feel a little bit like that main character in that your books are observations? You're kind of inferring the stories and emotions of your characters a little bit, and it is almost like you're watching them out your apartment window when you're doing your research and those kind of things.
Yeah, it is. It is similar. I'm just I'm putting half of myself in their place to see if I like it there, for one, and it's the only way I can kind of guess what the emotional value of those moments for that person are, and that's what I and push across to my readers so that they get invested emotionally. By the way, Jimmy Stewart's name is L.B. Jeffries, so you were close.
Jeffries, I was close. Jeffries, L.B. So when I'm thinking about this story, Rear Window, and trying to connect it, because I like to, as I said, talk about cinema because a lot of younger readers can connect to the cinema more than a book. I was thinking about a mutual friend of ours, Greg Pizzoli, has a series called Earl and Worm. And though these characters are very different from each other, they do learn about each other in their everyday interactions and through observation. Right. Yeah. So these characters together build an understanding and a friendship through kind of watching and observing, and the kind of funny stuff happens in some of these inferences and their interactions around them. One of the connections that I made to a curriculum activity is have the students sit down and kind of talk about how noticing details, right? So a character in a movie or a character in a book, how those characters noticing details can help us understand kind of the inner feelings that somebody has, and then how those inferences can either be horribly wrong and create a funny narrative,
Right.
or be spot on and create a moment of, empathy, right? And those two different kinds of things that can happen in those observational interactions.
Mhm.
And look at Adam doing stuff. So would you say you would also use something like Rear Window to, spark engagement, or is there another kind of go-to film that you have when you're like, all right, has anybody seen this movie? That's
Right.
it. Hudson Hawk. I know a lot about people by how they react to um, this movie, because I think it's hilarious, but it's dumb humor. It really is. It's slapstick dumb, and it's gloriously slapstick dumb. There's continuity errors, so that when they're driving in the same direction. Sometimes New York's on the left of the car, sometimes it's on the right of the car. But all of those things for me make it a great movie, like the Blues Brothers. All kinds of continuity errors in the Blues Brothers, but watch it for the music alone.
Yeah, sure. Well, I do that with I go back to like Fellini, his imagery alone is what gets me into the theaters, even though there's so much more. But because I'm an illustrator and a writer, Fellini grabs me first because there's so much said with just the images. And so that inspired me, or Antonioni. A lot of the European directors seem to do that for me visually. But I like Wes Anderson's films because he's a very visual director, and has a definite style. And you go there and you're conscious, you're so aware of the style, but it works. It's not, it's a positive element.
It adds to it the same way, illustrations add to the text in a picture book. It's building off things together. You can watch a silent movie, and, there's great examples of silent films.
Yeah.
But I think once they started to add things like, oh, we can put a score to this. Well, okay, now it's not a silent film anymore. Like, there's no dialogue in it, but there is a score, and that score changes the immediacy of the action, or how it dies down. I mean, that would bring up a really fun activity that I know I'm pulling this from an educator who told me about it in the past. If I can remember who gave it to me, I'll put that in the comments below. But they pick music from either a silent film or an animation, or like when you think about Bugs Bunny, you can hear the music in your head,
Right.
Warner Brothers music, or I really got into Ren and Stimpy for a while in college, and Animaniacs, like those little musical things, a little 2-minute, 3-minute thing, you play it in your classroom and have them draw or write. And what is going on in this movie? What's the story? And layer that together, or show that little clip of the Fellini film or some film and say, we've turned the sound off, and what's going on here?
You do the opposite.
Tell the story of this.
Especially with those Carl Stalling scores to the Warner Brothers cartoons.
Oh,
because they exist because of the action happening in the cartoon, and running music, and sleepy music, and you can almost picture it immediately.
Yeah, the music tells a story, and that gives us another great activity to finalize on. So Gene, tell us one last time about the new book, and let us know where people can find you. Of course, those links will be below, but give us the details.
Sure. Well, it'll be out in October, but you can pre-order it wherever books are sold. It's The Apprenticeship of Andrew Wyeth, and it's one that I'm back writing and illustrating after a 3-book hiatus of illustrating to develop this new style. It really is, even though we think of Andrew Wyeth's work for adults, it really is a book geared at kids and trying to inspire them to create their own work in their own world. GeneBarretta.com, the website is.
GeneBarretta.com, and the socials and all that. As everybody can tell, I love talking to Gene. This is probably one of the longest episodes that I've had, and that's because I really do enjoy these conversations and being creative with you. And I want to thank you again for joining us here on Picture This.
You got to come to the drive-in.
We definitely will. She's got to pick the movie. But if you liked this episode, please follow, like, share, comment. The more you talk about us, the more other people will want to come and join us here. And don't be afraid to ask questions, make suggestions. Again, we're creating a community of people who just want to help. Thank you for your time, and thank you for joining Picture This.